Dawn broke over Millbrook, Pennsylvania, on October 23, 1995, the air sharp with autumn chill. Detective Richard Cooper gripped the steering wheel of an unmarked van, his knuckles white, as a convoy crept toward the Follings mansion on Elm Street. The Victorian loomed like a sentinel, its windows dark, hiding secrets behind a mask of respectability. He'd promised Susan Fletcher, dying of cancer, that he'd uncover the truth about the family she suspected of unspeakable acts. As officers surrounded the house, a single light flickered on the third floor. Someone was awake. Cooper's heart pounded. What was waiting behind those locked doors? Millbrook, Pennsylvania, was a kind of town where secrets didn't last long. With fewer than 3,000 residents, its rolling hills and community potlucks fostered a closeness that made strangers rare. In 1978, Howard and Margaret Follings arrived, turning heads with their purchase of the crumbling Victorian on Elm Street. Locals called it the haunted house on the hill, abandoned for a decade, its windows like hollow eyes. Howard, a Pittsburgh investment banker with a tailored suit and a disarming smile, saw potential. Margaret, a former pediatric nurse with an elegant air, shared his vision. Together, they poured a fortune into renovations, transforming the dilapidated structure into a gleaming showpiece. It was like something out of a magazine, says Elaine Winters, their neighbor across the street. They were the couple everyone wanted to be. Howard's charisma and Margaret's poise made them instant fixtures in Millbrook's social scene. They attended church, donated generously to local causes, and hosted elegant dinners. You felt special just talking to them, Winters recalls. Howard always remembered your name, and Margaret had this way of making you feel like you mattered. But beneath the polished exterior, cracks began to show. Margaret, unable to have biological children, carried a quiet sorrow. She'd sit on her porch for hours, says Clara Jenkins, a church friend, watching the neighborhood kids play. There was something desperate in her eyes, like she was starving for something she couldn't name. In the summer of 1980, the Follings announced they'd adopted a baby boy, James. Millbrook rejoiced. Neighbors threw a surprise baby shower, and the local church held a blessing ceremony. James was a beautiful child, with bright eyes and a quick smile, and the Follings doted on him. But Margaret's devotion bordered on obsession. She wouldn't let anyone hold him. Jenkins says, at the blessing, when Pastor Williams reached for him, she froze, like a mother bear guarding her cub. Howard had to coax her to let go. The community chalked it up to new mother nerves, especially for a woman who'd waited so long for a child. But was it protective love, or something darker? By 1985, the Follings had adopted 4 more children, Elizabeth, Thomas, Catherine, and William, all under 6. The speed of the adoptions raised eyebrows. Pennsylvania's adoption process was notoriously slow, yet Howard's wealth and connections seemed to bypass the usual hurdles. They were seen as saviors, says Detective Richard Cooper, who later investigated the family, taking in kids who'd otherwise be stuck in foster care. Who questioned that? But questions lingered. None of the children attended public school. Margaret insisted on homeschooling. They rarely appeared in town, and when they did, they clung to their parents, silent and watchful. They didn't act like kids, says Patricia Hayes, a former resident. No running, no laughing. They were like little shadows. The first real alarm came in 1987. 9-year-old Thomas fell from a tree in the Follings' backyard, snapping his arm. Margaret, despite her nursing background, didn't rush him to the hospital. Instead, she tried to set the bone herself, a decision that led to a compound fracture and a raging infection. Only when Thomas spiked a dangerous fever did Howard intervene, driving him to Millbrook General Hospital. Dr. Sarah Chun, the attending physician, was stunned. The boy was in septic shock, she recalls. We barely saved his arm. But what chilled me was his silence. He didn't cry, didn't flinch. When I asked how it happened, he looked at his father, waiting for permission to speak. Dr. Chen's unease deepened when Howard claimed the children's medical records were lost in a fire at their adoption agency. Suspicious. She pressed for details, but Howard grew agitated, threatening to transfer Thomas elsewhere. I knew something was wrong, Chen says, but I had no proof. In a town like Millbrook, accusing the Follings could ruin you. She filed a report with Child Protective Services, citing potential medical neglect. Caseworker David Morris visited the Follings home, interviewed the parents, and observed the children. His report, filed 3 weeks later, found no evidence of abuse. "The home is clean and safe," he wrote. Mrs. Follings' attempt to treat the injury herself was ill-advised but not neglectful. The case was closed, and Millbrook moved on. But why did Thomas's silence feel like a scream no one heard? The Follings facade held, but whispers grew. Neighbors noticed the children's isolation. No sports, no friends, no freedom. "I tried setting up a play date for my son with James," Hayes says. "Margaret always had an excuse: illness, schoolwork, a trip. Eventually, I stopped asking." At church, the children sat in a perfect row, unnaturally still. "It was eerie," Jenkins says. "Kids fidget during sermons. These kids didn't. They just stared ahead, like they were afraid to move." The Follings adopted 3 more children between 1988 and 1990, Robert, Ann, and Henry, bringing their total to 8. Each adoption was swift, each child from a different agency, often in different states. How were they pulling it off? And why were the children so vacant, so controlled? The town's curiosity simmered, but Howard's influence, his donations, his board memberships, kept it at bay. Still, you can't help but ask, what was happening inside that mansion? By 1992, the Follings had 11 children, their adoptions a blur of efficiency that defied logic. Peter and Paul, twins, and Mary joined the family in rapid succession, each from a different agency, each with minimal records. It was like they were collecting kids. Says Cooper, "No one adopts that fast, not legally." The children remained isolated, homeschooled, and rarely seen outside the Follings estate. At community events, they stood close to their parents, their eyes downcast, their responses rehearsed. They were polite, but it felt scripted, says Jenkins, like they'd been trained to say the right things. Neighbors whispered about the strange family on Elm Street, but Howard's generosity, funding the town library, sponsoring the high school football team, silenced most doubts. Who would challenge a couple so devoted to saving children? Then the Fletchers arrived. Michael, a journalist, Susan, a social worker, and their teenage daughter, Emily, moved into a modest house near the Follings in 1992. Susan, with years of experience in child welfare, noticed red flags immediately. The kids flinched at loud noises. Emily recalls her mother saying, "They never looked you in the eye, always watching Margaret, like they were waiting for a signal." Susan began documenting her observations. The children's robotic behavior, their lack of spontaneity, the way Margaret controlled every interaction. She tried befriending Margaret, hoping to get closer. Margaret was initially receptive, inviting Susan for coffee, even welcoming her into the Follings home. But during one visit, Susan heard something that chilled her, shuffling and faint crying from a locked third-floor room. "It's just storage," Margaret said, her smile tight. Susan didn't buy it. Michael's work at the Millbrook Gazette added fuel to Susan's suspicions. He was researching adoption fraud, uncovering agencies shut down in the 1980s for placing children without proper documentation. The timelines matched the Follings' early adoptions. Emily says, "Dad never named them in his articles, but he'd come home and tell Mom he had a bad feeling." Susan's notes grew detailed. A girl's face at a third-floor window, not matching any known Follings child. Margaret's evasive answers. The children's fear of sudden movements. When Susan mentioned the girl to Margaret, she laughed it off. Must be Elizabeth or Catherine. But Susan knew every Follings child by sight. This was someone else. Who was she, and why was she hidden? Susan's cancer diagnosis in 1994 halted her efforts. As her health deteriorated, her urgency grew. In her final days, confined to hospice care, she called Cooper to her bedside. She handed me a file. Cooper recalls pages of notes, photos of the house, that third-floor window. She made me promise to dig deeper. Susan died on June 12, 1995, but her file lit a fire under Cooper. He started quietly, knowing the Follings' influence made open investigation risky. Public records revealed little. Sealed adoption papers, property deeds, tax filings, but oddities emerged. The Follings used multiple agencies across 3 states, making substantial donations to each. Trust funds for the children had bizarre conditions. No contact with birth families, no inquiries into their origins. It was about control. Cooper says everything they did was about control. Cooper interviewed former Folling employees, most of whom had left town abruptly. He tracked down Maria Vasquez, a housekeeper who'd worked for the Follings in 1991. Initially reluctant, she broke down when shown Susan's file. She started crying. Cooper said, someone else knows. Vasquez described a house ruled by fear. The children followed ever-changing rules, punished for minor infractions, standing in corners all night, denied meals. They called Howard and Margaret sir and madam, never mom or dad. Most chilling were the locked third-floor rooms. Vasquez left food outside 3 times a day, but was forbidden to enter. She heard children's voices, crying, singing softly, but never saw them. When she asked Margaret, she was told they were special needs kids, isolated for their safety. Vasquez fled after witnessing James, an 11, punished for speaking out of turn, forced to stand motionless all night. I was afraid, she said, not just of losing my job, but of what they'd do if they knew I saw. Emily Fletcher, now 19 and studying journalism, picked up her mother's work. She scoured missing children reports, finding a pattern. When the Follings adopted from an area, another child, often from a marginalized community, vanished nearby within a month. Foster kids, migrant workers' children, kids from poor families. Emily says, no one looked hard for them. Cooper, using his law enforcement access, confirmed her findings. 3 missing children, Maria Gomez, Tyrell Washington, Alexi Petro, disappeared from areas tied to Folling adoptions, their cases barely investigated. They were disposable to the system, Cooper says bitterly. Perfect targets for predators. But what were the Follings doing with these children? And why were they so obsessed with control? Cooper's superiors rebuffed his initial findings. Chief Raymond Wallace warned him off, citing the Follings' ties to the mayor and DA. You're letting your friendship with the Fletchers cloud your judgment, Wallace said. Undeterred, Cooper worked off duty, keeping his notes at home. He drove by the Folling house, watching for patterns. The children rarely left, and when they did, they were never alone. Teachers who'd seen them during mandatory testing described them as withdrawn, overly compliant. The pieces were there, but the picture was incomplete. What was happening on that 3rd floor? And how many children were truly in that house? Cooper's breakthrough came in late 1995. Bypassing his chief, he sent Susan's file, Vasquez's testimony, Emily's research, and his own findings to Lisa Harper, a state police contact on a child exploitation task force. Harper acted fast, securing a warrant for the Folling mansion. The operation was planned for dawn on October 23, 1995, to catch the household off guard. We had to move quickly, Cooper says. If the Follings got wind of this, they could destroy evidence, or worse. The team, including state troopers and DOJ agents, approached in unmarked vehicles, securing perimeter before knocking. Howard answered in a silk bathrobe, eerily calm. He was expecting us. Cooper says, like he'd been waiting. Margaret was another story. She screamed, accusing officers of violating her home, her children. When she lunged a female officer, she was restrained. The search began methodically. The 11 known Folling children sat in their bedrooms, awake despite the hour, dressed and silent on their beds. They didn't react, says Harper. No fear, no curiosity. It was like they'd been hollowed out. Their responses were robotic. Sir and Madam provide everything we need. Even James, now 17, offered nothing more. What had been done to make them so lifeless? The 3rd floor revealed the truth. 3 locked rooms had Sofia, Mateo, and Carlos Herrera, ages 10 and 8, cowering in corners. The rooms were bare, Cooper says, his voice tight. Mattresses on the floor, blackout curtains nailed shut, the stench of neglect. The children were malnourished, covered in filth, and spoke little English, suggesting they'd been taken from non-English-speaking homes. They had no records, no birth certificates, ghosts in the system. Medical exams confirmed physical abuse and severe trauma. Who were they, and how long had they been hidden? Margaret's journal, found in Howard's study, unveiled her madness. Spanning 20 years, it detailed her mission to create a perfect family by purging children's sins. The 11 adopted children were redeemable, subjected to strict discipline and rituals to cleanse their souls. The vessels, like the Herreras, were different. Margaret believed they were too corrupted to save, used to absorb sins from the redeemable through rituals involving bitter drinks, incantations, and blood. When a vessel was filled, deemed by Margaret's gaze into their eyes, they were discarded. The journal hinted at a resting place on the property. Excavation uncovered 5 shallow graves in the Follings woods, marked by stones. The remains, dating back to 1981, showed children died of neglect, malnutrition, dehydration, exposure. 3 were tentatively identified: Maria Gomez, Tyrell Washington, Alexi Petro, all reported missing from areas tied to Folling adoptions. 2 remained Jane and John Doe. Howard's plea deal revealed more: 8 additional bodies on other Folling properties: a lake house, a hunting cabin, a beach house. 13 victims in total, all from vulnerable communities. They targeted kids no one would miss, says Assistant U.S. Attorney Meredith Lane. They exploited a broken system. Margaret, deemed incompetent, was committed to a psychiatric facility, where she died in 2008, unrepentant. Howard, sentenced to 25 years, died in prison in 2011, claiming he was merely Margaret's enabler. The 12 adopted children faced varied fates. James died by suicide. Thomas vanished. Catherine overdosed. The survivors, like Elizabeth, struggled with trauma. The Herreras were reunited with their family, but their scars remain. Millbrook demolished the Folling house, planting a garden with 25 trees. 12 oaks were redeemable, 13 willows for the vessels. Each year, a vigil honors them, but Cooper can't let go. There might be more out there, he says. Kids without names, still waiting. The Folling case is a scar on Millbrook's soul. 25 children, 12 redeemable, 13 vessels, suffered under Margaret's delusional rituals and Howard's complicity. Hidden behind wealth and respectability, their crimes thrive for 15 years. The survivors, like Elizabeth, carry wounds that may never heal. The garden on Elm Street stands as a tribute. Its 25 trees a silent vow to remember. Yet questions linger. How many more victims lie undiscovered? What failures let this horror fester? The Follings warn us that evil can wear a friendly face. Will we heed the signs next time, or let another child slip through the cracks?